Matt Jones here from TRC. I'm the Technical Review Manager for the Multifamily Upgrade Program. I thank you all for attending. So the way this will work today is, let's see, so we will be, everyone is muted. And so if you dialed in, there's an audio pin. And if you enter that audio pin, that allows us to unmute you if you have any questions. Now, if you have a question, there are a couple ways that we can address them. So one is that you can enter in your questions on the questions tab of GoToWebinar, and we'll address them at the end of each section or as they come up. And you can also raise your hand. There's a little icon that you can click, and that will kind of alert us to unmute you and address your question. So I think we have a good quorum of folks, so I'm going to jump right in. And so we're going to talk quickly about program status. We'll touch on the incentive structure, which has changed a little bit this year. We'll talk about some of the program rules and combustion safety requirements, and we'll be soliciting your feedback on how everything's going for you. So we have $5 million in incentive funds for 2017. We've got about 2,200 projects that are kind of in the review stage, or documents are coming in for those units. So those are kind of underway, and we're checking them out. And we've got another 2,200 units that have submitted applications. So the pipeline, it's looking good. It's filling up, but we still are accepting projects in. Standard disclaimer, this funding is limited, and we're reserving incentives on a first-come, first-served basis. And we reserve incentives at the time they pass assessment review. So the incentive structure did change a little bit this year. At the bottom end, for 10% savings, we reduced the incentive. It's now $400 per unit. And that incentive rate ramps up slowly until you get to 19% savings, at which point the incentives kind of ramp up more quickly to the tune of $75 for each additional percentage point saved. So we're talking about the performance incentive. The maximum incentive a project can get for a really deep, say a deep energy retrofit or something that saves 50% or more incentive or savings is $3,000 per unit. So we kind of changed this approach to encourage projects to go to do more measures and to go after deeper energy savings. So you'll find that at the low end, the incentives will be less relative to last year, but as your projects push towards higher energy savings, the incentives get richer and get more generous pretty quickly. So so we're hoping that'll help you kind of push projects and have a little bit more influence with your customers. And this change can hopefully help you too. So we also have the assessment incentive, and that starts at $100 per unit. But for projects that save 25% energy or more, that assessment incentive jumps up to $125 per unit. And there's a cap at 200 units for the assessment incentive. So the cap for 24% savings and under is $20,000, and the other cap is $25,000 if your project's at 25% savings or higher. we have a few, some key deadlines to keep in mind. You must pass the assessment review, so that's submitting documents, going through the review process by the end of September 29th of this year. And then completion documents are due no later than November 13th of 2017. And we're hoping to get to keep projects from kind of backloading to that November 13th date. So if the construction timeline has a project finishing up in, say, June, then we request test out documents by July, and that will be a hard deadline. If you do, if you run into some problems or if construction's delayed, we can definitely work with you, but it's really important to kind of have a good, to keep in communication with us so we know what's happening with projects. These deadlines, especially that November 13th deadline, that's for the construction is complete on the buildings and verification happens. That includes combustion safety testing, photo documentation, everything that you need to submit the project has to be in by November 13th. And if we miss those deadlines, then we'll have to put the project on a wait list. So with that, we're going to kind of just move pretty quickly here. One of the changes that we made this year is to move towards the ANSI BPI Standard 1200. We're adopting most of the requirements in that standard when they apply for us. And so there are a few differences, and a lot of it is the same. So you establish, like when you're doing your combustion safety testing, you establish your worst case conditions, turning on fans, closing doors, keeping doors to places with exhaust fans open. You'll conduct your spillage test. You'll conduct a CO test in undiluted flue gases. But a big change is that draft testing is no longer required. And the kind of reason we do this, so PG&E is really has safety as a strong goal in our program. And what we're aiming for here is to determine if the equipment is operating safely and to recommend action and remediation when it's not. So we have, we're in these units for just, 45 minutes to an hour at best. And so we have these standards to kind of set things up so that we can figure out to the best of our ability, how the systems are operating, in the worst possible condition that they can be found. So while we're following that standard 1200, you'll notice that some of the threshold levels are a little bit higher than under the building analyst standard. But an important thing to keep in mind is that PG&E's thresholds for when you must notify the gas service representative, they're more strict than the 1200 standard. So always have this table in the back of your mind. So if your appliance fails spillage, then your CO threshold is quite low. It's 26 parts per million. And if it's passes spillage, then it's 100 parts per million. So those are so when we need you to notify the GSR, it's a bit stricter than standard 1200. So keep that in the back of your mind while you're doing these testing, to make sure that you're following the requirements. And so one thing that I think may come up are some issues with wall furnaces. So gravity wall furnaces are notorious for failing the spillage test under worst case conditions. This can happen at test in, but it can also happen at test out if we install measures that tighten the building envelope. And so your goal when you're doing combustion safety testing here is to kind of figure out why the appliance, like why you're having a failure. Is it because of exhaust appliances that are depressurizing the zone? Is it because of a lack of makeup air? You know, kind of suss it out, figure out what the issue is, recommend repairs. And I think one thing that you might notice, as opposed to the old requirements, which kind of allowed you to test under natural conditions and as a fallback, the standard 1200 doesn't have, it's all the testing is done in worst case conditions. So we might have more spillage issues, especially with wall furnaces, and you may be calling the GSR more often than you have in the past. And I'm wondering, and this, if you have an option to, like, if you want to comment, I'm interested to hear feedback on, you know, if you expect this to be a problem, have you seen it already, and what are some things that you've done to correct these failures? And Mike, if you're there, do we have any hands raised or questions so far?
Yeah, so there's one question for calling a GSR. Is the failed spillage test based on a test at worst case or at natural conditions? And
go ahead.
I'm happy to let you kind of clarify the question, Nick, if you'd like to. I've unmuted you now, but hopefully I captured the thrust of it.
Yep, yeah, that's correct. It just on the previous slide, the table of the spillage test result and the CO threshold, if that pass or failure in that middle column is based on the test at worst case or the test at natural.
Right, and the answer is that it's at worst case condition.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so that's exactly why we might have more GSR calls on projects. And that, you know, overall, I think we kind of expect that we'll have some GSR calls, and if it plays out to be the case, I think that gives us. So we would love to hear about these issues from you, and I think it can help us give a case for maybe making an exception to this policy if it turns out to be a real issue in the field. Any other questions or comments, Mike?
I don't see any other questions at this time about this issue, so let's keep moving.
Okay. So there's some market challenges that I think everyone is facing at the moment. So one is there's been some bit of uncertainty created from an expectation that perhaps taxes may change for corporations. And so this has kind of trickled down into the tax credit financing market, and we've spoken with some developers that are seeing something like up to a 10% reduction in their available financing on a project. So, you know, this is kind of a real issue for some retrofits that are being that are in the pipeline or, going for financing. And, another kind of challenge that the multifamily upgrade program has faced is our one-year program cycle. So we have many of you are working on projects, and the project timeline is 12 months, or it's 18 months, or maybe even 24 months. But since our funding cycle is 1 year, we can easily kind of lose projects that fall in the gaps or extending over the course of a year and a half or so. So these are a couple things that we're aware of and that we're kind of working on, especially the funding cycle. But for now, it is what it is. So what we're trying to do to help, one is we have a new electronic application process. So no longer must a customer print and hand sign the PDF. They can now use an electronic signature on the application. And I'm hoping that this can, reduce a little bit of the administrative burden for you by updating or negating the need to go back to the owner over and over to request things. Another thing that is kind of in the works is benchmarking. So PG&E is close to enrolling their ability to pull data on projects, and that should launch. I believe it might launch this week. And TRC is working to with PG&E on this process, and we can facilitate data requests. So if you're working with a customer and want to offer them a benchmark or help them get their data, contact us, and we can kind of make that request go smoother. Another thing that we're thinking that we're working on is to create a sort of benchmark report with this data, with the idea that you could use it to approach your customers and kind of help them prioritize their projects, or just to help explain how they're using energy in their properties. Mike, do you want to jump in and add anything about benchmarking or anything I talked about there?
I think you covered it, but we do have some questions that have come in. So, John, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and let you ask your questions. And I'm also happy to just fill in for you. It looks like maybe you're having audio technical difficulties. So until you get set up, I'll just go ahead and prompt the question. So number one, is there a combustion appliance safety data collection sheet developed for this program?
Oh, yes. I do believe we have one. I haven't looked at it in a while. But yeah, I'll dig it up and I'll send it to you, John.
And we're also flexible to use your data collection sheet. So whichever is easier, but we do have one that we can provide for you. John, are you unmuted now? Or you should be unmuted now if you'd like to ask your other questions.
Can you hear me, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. So the other question was, in the handbook, we see that the rater incentive is minimum $2,500, and I just have to ask, if there are 6 units on a property, then the minimum to the rater for the rater incentive would be $2,500, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then the last question is, we have a project that we're assessing next month, and it's in PG&E territory, but they're not going to start construction until January 2018. And so if we use the protocols of this program to do the assessment, would that data be valid for 2018 program cycle?
Right, and here, Mike, do you want to kind of take that one? If not, I'll jump on it.
Sure. So we don't know what the 2018 program cycle is going to look like. So we can't answer that question right now. What we can tell you is that the assessment requirements should be consistent, but we can't say for certain one way or the other about whether or not they actually will be. So what we're planning to do, and what Matt sort of alluded to there, John, I think I'm gonna mute you. I think there's some background noise there. So if you want to clarify, just feel free to raise your hand or ask another question. But the 2018 program. So what we're planning to do is work with the benchmarking portal and set up projects in the portal as a way of sort of pre-applying these projects, and we're working with PG&E to come up with an approach for how projects can kind of start the process now and continue the process in 2018. So we don't have definitive details at this time, but we're aware that this is an issue and a concern for everybody, and we're trying to come up with a solution that works. Does that hopefully that answers the question about 2018, John. Unfortunately, we don't have any definitive information right now, but we're working to try and get you all a process where you can understand how to engage projects now that are going to complete later after our program ends this year or sometime in 2018, and we're working on it. Hopefully, we'll have an update for you soon. Okay, that looks like it did answer the question. Hopefully I solved the background audio questions. It sounds like I did to me, but let me know if anybody else is having any issues. And we do have a couple other questions from another partner. So Mark, you should be unmuted. I'm happy to ask the questions that you've chatted already, or you feel free to ask your questions directly.
Yeah, thanks. What I was wanting to ask was about, I have a property that's got 96 units, 16 of them burned down. They're interested in going through the rebate program for the first 16. They're interested in doing all the units, but they're not going to do them this year. It kind of tied into the last question about what would happen on the multi-year program. But would they be able to participate in the program just doing the 16 units instead of the entire 96?
Oh, yes. Yeah, if it's a building, say it's a 16-unit building that will finish up, before November 13th of this year, then yes, we can bring that building in, whatever buildings are completing.
Okay. And the other one was concerning your benchmarking. Is it possible to use the portfolio manager, GPA portfolio manager, for your benchmarking?
Yeah, Mike, I'll let you take that, but I think that is one thing that we are considering is tying it to portfolio manager.
Okay.
Yes, so the platform that PG&E has built to provide benchmarking data is connected with Portfolio Manager, and it's our intention to try and get all of our projects using Portfolio Manager as the sort of interim data, as the place where the data gets pushed from PG&E automatically, and we're flexible to also use whatever other proprietary benchmarking tools are available. But that's our plan for now, is to get projects into Portfolio Manager and start to use that as the sort of standard entry point for benchmarking. And I apologize about the background noise. Let me know if you're continuing to hear any excess noises, and I'll try and keep myself muted. But I think that answers all of the questions for right now. So go ahead and take it away, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Kind of another thing that we'd like to help you with, or where we can provide assistance perhaps if it works out, is that many of you on this call are on the technical side of things, but if you have staff that are reaching out to projects and kind of doing some more of the administrative or outreach aspects, we'd be happy to talk to those staff and give them an overview of kind of the standard multifamily upgrade requirements, so that they feel really confident talking to their customers about the program. I think the electronic application improvements are another kind of thing that we're trying to do to reduce your burden. And finally, we talked about incentives earlier, but we're hoping that with your help and pushing projects to do some, a few more upgrades, or finding a couple measures they may have not thought about before, we can, partially make up that tax credit gap with some richer incentives. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about on our end. And I'd be happy for feedback from the audience on just how things are going for you, in the market, but also with this program, what's working well for you, what could we do better, and what are some challenges in the industry. And so think of it like, do we have any questions, or anyone? Please raise your hand if you'd like to jump in. And Mike, you might be muted.
Yep. So I just realized. Looks like we have one follow-up question from Ben about benchmarking. Ben, do you want to ask your question? Well, go ahead. You're very faint there, Ben. So just in the interest of time, the question is, who at TRC should property owners contact regarding benchmarking support? You can contact the general program email, or you can contact me, and we'll get your information to the right person. There is you should all be aware that this is part of AB 802, which you may have heard about. And so there is a requirement that PG&E must provide this information to their customers for properties that have 5 or more residential utility accounts starting in January of this year. So there is a plan to have a portal available, an online web application that would allow you to request this information sort of yourselves automatically through PG&E's website. That web application is still under development, so in the interim, the process is that you can email PG&E directly. We would just ask to be involved with projects and customers that are going through the multifamily upgrade program, so that we can help kind of facilitate that process. And we're planning to use this as a step in our program moving forward. We would like to, as kind of a point of fact, start to benchmark all of the properties that go through the program and start to kind of measure our success, both in terms of energy simulation, but also in terms of benchmark reporting. So you can contact me, and I'll help answer any other questions that you have for the time being. Are there any other questions or feedback? I think what we're trying to use these quarterly partner meetings for is to make sure that this program is moving in the right direction. I understand that there's probably some limitations and issues with the way it's working right now, but if you can give us some feedback about any pain points that you have, or any of the changes that Matt has just sort of highlighted that are useful for you, that's what we're trying to get some feedback on. It doesn't have to necessarily be today, but we're just sort of prompting the discussion right now. And if you can, if you have a question, or if you have a comment, we welcome it now, or by email after this call. So are there any other questions or comments from anybody?
Yeah, and I'll jump in, Mike. So our emails are going to be at you'll see them at the end of this slideshow, and you'll also be able to grab them later. But if you're working with a reviewer, you can always send questions to them, and they may get back to Mike and I. One thing that we have been thinking about that we're kind of working on are some installation guidelines. And so these would be, idea behind these would be you could use them either to help kind of build out your specifications for the owner, or potentially you could have an installer use them as a checklist. We're thinking some of the key guidelines could be for window installation, but maybe even it could be something like, figuring out, should I have a low SHGC window for my climate? Does that make sense? A lot of spec windows are low solar heat gain, but it doesn't always make sense from an energy perspective. Is that something that that would be helpful for owners to know more about, or contractors to know more about? Likewise, for attic installation, there's a lot of prep work that's involved in doing a good job before you blow the insulation in. And, is that something that's helpful? So that we're kind of working on those, and we don't have anything prepared yet, but it's on the horizon, and we love your feedback on kind of what the needs are and how you might use them.
Okay, we have a couple questions that have come in from Molly. Molly, I just unmuted you if you'd like to ask your questions.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my first question was basically our concern is that if the property owner or our client is unable to reach the end of construction within the deadline that's provided for this year, what we've been finding is that it's been difficult for us to get them to commit to that. So we've done a lot of work with them already, and unfortunately, if we're basically at the mercy of them completing the construction in order to get the rater incentive at the back end. Is there any way that we might be able to receive something up front, maybe once the assessment had been approved during that process with TRC?
Yeah, that's a great question. We understand, and we're kind of with you, frankly, about these calendar year cycles. It's a difficulty of trying to fit a construction schedule into a sort of, frankly, kind of an arbitrary calendar year cycle. At this time, we're not going to change the way the rater incentive is paid this year, but we have considered a variety of possibilities for the way the rater incentive should be paid in the future. So some of those possibilities, one of those possibilities includes what you're describing, where we pay a percentage, 30% upfront, 70% at completion, something like that. Another option that we've considered and is kind of an interesting idea is to pay partners an assessment incentive for a fixed number of projects, and then after you reach that limit, all future projects are kind of funded by you and contractual agreement with the owner. So there's a variety of kind of improvements that we'd like to explore about the way that incentive process works. But for the time being, we're running this program we're running this year of the program under the kind of the existing paradigm, which is that we pay all of the assessment incentive and all of the upgrade incentive once the project is complete. What we encourage you to do, and I think that there are some creative mechanisms out there in the market, is to work with your owner on a contracting scheme that might allow the owner to pay you up front and then receive most or part of the incentive once the project is complete. That's a way of kind of making the owner engaged in the process and understanding how important the completion deadlines are.
Sure.
Also, just so you're aware, the 2018 program, I'm giggling because this is, we've mentioned this a few times now over the years, but hopefully this 2018 program will do away with this calendar year restriction, and we're trying to work with PG&E on kind of defining how that structure is going to work for customers moving forward. So hopefully we will get to a place where this is more of a rolling kind of enrollment, and we can be more flexible about the timing and scheduling of completions on projects. But for this calendar year, we're under the kind of current paradigm. Okay. And it looks like you had, was that just kind of more clarification in your second question there, Molly? Or if you have any questions or comments about what I just answered?
Sure. No, that was great feedback. Thank you.
Great. Okay. I'm going to, oh, you muted yourself. Great. Thanks. All right. Are there any other questions or comments at this time? All right.
All right. So, yeah. So if you don't have a question today, we'll be doing this again. We're going to do a few of these, and then we'll also be reaching out to you, especially if you have a project that's that you're working with a reviewer. You can expect to hear from the reviewer, and they'll ask you questions about your project, but they'll also kind of just be checking in to see how things are going and stuff. So we're always available for any questions that you have, or if you would like to provide us feedback, you can. Another thing a new thing for this year is that we're going to be doing mid-project check-ins. We'll do a few of these. One around after the assessment has been completed and we looked at completed the assessment review. That'll be a time to have a project check-in, and we're aiming to get the contractor, the rater, and the building owner or owner representative at that meeting, and it's a chance for you to kind of explain some of the things about the project, things that might come up. So if, one of the kind of hot topics always is that we have 100% combustion safety test out, if equipment is changed or if the building envelope changes and affects the combustion appliance zone. So, that can be sometimes it's a surprise for owners if the extent of testing or, if repairs might have to be made. So these kind of meetings that we'll be having at the beginning, middle, and towards the end of the project are great chances to kind of set expectations with the owner, kind of will detail, what the documents that we'll be needing at the end are. So people can be thinking about, oh, okay, I need to save my invoices, so I can submit them later. It just should offer an opportunity to kind of make things go smoothly. And we've done a couple of these so far this year, and I think they were valuable for everyone involved. So be on the lookout for that. We'll be engaging you, if not before, then definitely at the time that we reserve the incentives on a project. We'll be following up to kind of figure out a good time to schedule those first meetings. And then finally, we are having a Partner Expo annual meeting event this year. We haven't scheduled it yet, but we'll be sending out a survey to kind of get your feedback on what we should include and when a good time for it would be. So so you'll be receiving an email from us, in the coming days about that meeting. So please take 10 minutes and look at your calendar and take the survey and give us some feedback for the partner meeting. And I think we are close to finish. So here's my contact info, Mr. Jones at trcsolutions.com, and Mike's contact info is there too. You can always send a note to the kind of general inbox. We check that, and we'll get back to you. Mike, any questions, comments from the audience?
Nope, no further questions or comments, but I'll just reiterate that we're always open to feedback. So we're just trying to prompt some discussion points today. Thank you for attending, and let us know by email if you guys have any questions that you want to follow up on, or any comments about the way the program should work or could work better for you. We're always open to that. And some of these issues that we've presented today, like benchmarking, like the 2018 program, like the calendar year limits, we're aware of those, and we're working on trying to make those issues, trying to find solutions for those issues along with PG&E. So if you have suggestions, or if you just want to, reiterate to us that that's, or let us know that that's a particular issue for you, we're, part of this process is to try and get that feedback and make sure that the changes that we've made and the changes that we're thinking about making work for you, our partners. So thanks for attending today, and let us know if you've got any thoughts, or you got any questions in particular. We're happy to handle those offline. And this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube page for reference if you would like to reference it again. Still looks like we don't have any questions, so I'll let you close it out here, Matt.
All right. Hey, thank you, everybody, and we'll look forward to working with you on your projects. Have a good day.